Welcome back to the Remote Life. My name is Hannah Talbot, also known as Ham Meets World, and today I want to chat about something that has been on my mind and might be a little bit controversial. And that is that I think more people are going to be quitting the digital nomad lifestyle. However, remote work will continue to live on. Let's grab a coffee, a tea, or something stronger, and let's get started. So, before we get too crazy and up in arms, lol, let's keep in mind that remote working has been around since the invention of .com and the boom, as it were, which is what, 30, 40 years at this point? And so, yeah, being able to remote work has been around for decades. It's not new. I know someone tried to tell me that like even digital nomadism was only like 5 years old. It's not. This whole concept of remote working and being able to work flexibly has been around for a very long time. It has just all of a sudden become a lot more accessible for people, right? So, first of all, let's take a chill pill. This lifestyle has been around for a long time. But I think what has become apparent and what seems to become the loudest voice is people who are digital nomads. That is, people who work and travel full time, essentially. Maybe have like everything in a backpack. That's the image is generally people in their 20s who have nothing but their backpack and a laptop and are traveling around the world, living their best lives and sharing it on social media typically. That's kind of the image that a lot of people confront me with. And I know there'll be people listening going, but that's not true. And I know that it's not true. But that is one of those commonly asked things I get from people about, but isn't it just people in their 20s? Living and working like from hostel, like wherever they go. And that is one version of it. That is one version of how people live. People want to be able to live the most budget friendly way possible and see the world and maybe party a lot and work every now and again. Like that is the lifestyle. But I think one thing that has become apparent for me and as why I want to raise this, because I think doesn't get talked enough. I think that people who are working and traveling full time, and that image I just gave you is only one small portion of many types of digital nomad lifestyle. But I think that because it feels the loudest, it has somehow become the sort of anchor, the sort of driving force of what it means to remote work and remote live, as it were. And I think it's starting to get to a point where the image that seems the loudest does not actually fit with a lot of people's way of working remotely and how governments, how companies are responding to that. And it's showing also in their marketing, it's showing up in events, it's showing up in who is still in the game and who isn't, quite honestly. And yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack with this. Not all remote workers are digital nomads, but all digital nomads are remote workers. I think remote workers in general, when I started the podcast, right, for anybody who has never listened to Remote Life before, I started this podcast and I was always very kind of set on calling it the remote whatever. Like it started as the remote worker, then it became the remote life very quickly. And it was always about portraying the different ways that people go remote. I myself had been on off remote since 2013. At that point, I started on my study abroad when I had to start looking for different places to write my thesis or my dissertation, depending on what you call it, because of external circumstances. And the internet was not what it is now back then. So I really had to get resourceful. And fast forward to wanting to create a career out of the internet and wanting to design my own life the way I wanted it to and the way that I work best, I found out that digital nomads are a thing. I first discovered them from working them in London, but then I Googled them and I started understanding there were people who were also jet setting off to places like Bali and Lisbon and all these awesome places that we now kind of know as the digital nomad hotspots, right? But honestly, for myself, and I know for a lot of people who are listening and who are remote working, it's always been about having a flexible lifestyle, whether that is that you want to go work and travel, whether that is that you want to just work from your home office, whether you just work better being in your little bubble, working from a WeWork or whatever, or looking after your cat, or being able to pick up your kids. Like there's so many different ways that people remote work that I think still gets so overlooked. Whenever people think about, okay, we're going to create a product for remote working, for example, I feel like the automatic assumption is that they are somebody who is living out of a backpack and constantly on the move, when actually I would say most people are likely in a home office or have a co-work subscription, and you'll find them there at 20 minutes from their house, right? It's not about just being able to take off whenever you want to. And I think that we've got that image incredibly wrong now. As I said, like there's the commonly quoted thing I get is, isn't it people in their 20s who are jet setting off around the world? I don't meet that many 20-something-year-olds anymore in a hostel or in a co-work space or in a co-work industry or campaign. Industry event or campaign. And so it's super interesting to me then talking to people who are outside the bubble, I guess, and what they see from the outside looking in. And so that's why I say I think the marketing of what it means to remote work, it's got all wrong. It got all very wrong. How I've come to understand people who are remote working is that it is parents who want to be there to pick up their kids. It is people who want to work with their pets. It is people who want to go work from a beautiful co-work space and then take lunch with a friend because they can. It is people who don't want to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds a year on commuting and perhaps want to spend that money on saving for a house or looking after a loved one. Or there's somebody who physically cannot go to work, and so therefore remote work is therefore better for them and their circumstances. Like there are so many different identities of remote worker, and for some reason we still get stuck on this one image of a guy who has a backpack on the beach working with a laptop as if that's actually possible. Anyway, I think that is one thing, is that a lot of people are just over that image of remote working. And I pause because I think also, I know for myself that I got very burned out with trying to keep up this image of being somebody who is constantly on the move, who is working from exciting places. And don't get me wrong, I was working from some incredible places and at destinations and also like physical places. I mean, it's cafes. But underneath, I was getting so dead inside, as I was sort of getting when I was location dependent, working a corporate job and everything I was told to be. And I think that was the problem. I was sort of starting to feed this lifestyle that no longer worked for me, and keeping it up, it just wasn't working. It didn't feel right. It wasn't representative of my values and my goals. Like even before I was a digital nomad or working when traveling full time, this wasn't how I traveled. This wasn't how I saw the world and how I wanted to connect with places. And I think that's the same for people who might remote work 80% of the time, but then want to go travel when they want to. It's about being able to connect with the world a lot deeper and a lot more meaningfully for yourself, and just live a life a lot more authentically than perhaps, we've been sort of taught that for a lot of us we had to grow up and be in. Yeah, most remote workers that I have met they typically express that they want to remote work for themselves, for their own values, for their own reasons. It's not about being in Thailand one day and then Brazil or Lisbon the next. It's about living a meaningful life that works for them. And I think, that marketing has a lot to play. And so I am actually coming up with a way that I can sort of help, hopefully not alter it, because again, it's not wrong. It's just not correct. It doesn't fit for a lot of remote workers in general. There's a very small portion of people who are digital nomads, really, right? And I think for me, it's a chapter. Being a digital nomad, constantly on the move, it's a chapter for people because it's just not sustainable. You get to a point where you are just burned out. And I'm sure there might be people who might be trying to argue with me that they stayed somewhere for 6 months and then kept going again. Okay, but is that digital nomadism or is that slow nomadism, right? Because slow nomadism is becoming a thing now. But anyway, this is not what I'm trying to debate. I think for 2026, the way that remote work and digital nomadism, because it is a section of remote work, is marketed needs a serious rebranding. It needs a real, like, hourglass. No, what is it? Yes, it needs a magnifying glass. That's it. Magnifying glass taken to it and really just looked at in a very serious way. Because I think that's also part of it, right? Is that digital nomads get a very loud seat at the table when it comes to things like visas and workation programs. And I think the way that they live, the way that these visas aren't made for them. Right. A lot of these visas aren't made for them, with the exception of perhaps the destination Thailand visa. A lot of these visas were started as a way for people to be based somewhere for, well, the visa is normally for a year, but you have to be in the country for 6, right? And again, don't quote me on that because they will vary. But I think a lot of these programs are not set up for people who are constantly working and traveling full time. And yet they are the ones who get the say on these things versus the remote workers who might, for example, want to come try a different country for a year, or who might be looking for entryways to citizenship or wanting to. There are so many different reasons again. Like the ways people remote work, they vary. Like they are unique, just like people are. And I think that again, there needs to be this sort of consideration that not all remote workers are digital nomads. That's where the quote comes back to, right? Digital nomads are, from my experience, typically in a country for, some people told me they're in a country for 3 days. Some people tell me that they're in a country for 3 months or 6 months, whatever it is. These visas just aren't necessarily made for people who constantly want to be on the move for, say, like 2 to 5 years of their life, right? And I think that because they are posting constantly online, because they are able to provide their opinion, they're the ones that people seek out. But actually, there is this portion of people, and much bigger, again, group of people who are doing it, just not as overtly on social media as it might appear. They might, for example, focus heavily on the fact that they have a business, but actually they happen to also work from their home office. And that's that. Again, I'm not going to go through the many different scenarios, but there is a very small portion of people who I feel get the seat at the table to decide these things, and it's not necessarily thought out properly. I'm sorry. Or am I? Well, I think coming up on 5 years of visas for remote workers and digital nomads in general, I think now is a good time to reflect also on whether these visas also are culturally appropriate. And I don't mean like, I mean like, are they meant for these countries? Like, is it actually something that could work in these destinations? Or is it just that a destination sees that there could be money in it and they want to open it up to people? Because the amount of times I hear that people are trying to get a digital nomad visa, but the paperwork is insane, or there's a very strong possibility that they won't get it because of the paperwork. I do have to wonder how many countries are perhaps trying to get in on a global conversation, but not actually looking at how it fits culturally into their destination also. For example, I would say the destination Thailand visa, DTV, just so I don't have to say that all again next time. It makes sense, I think. I think they got it right with how they understand the type of traveller and remote worker who moves through the country and how they work, i.e. there's somebody who wants to spend a lot of time in Thailand, like say 6 months. So just for context, right now, as far as I'm aware, the DTV allows you to essentially get given a visa for 5 years and you can come and go through Thailand and stay up to 6 months in one trip, right? Don't ask me how long you have to leave it before you come back. I can't remember. But The idea is that you essentially keep returning to Thailand. You're investing in long-term rental agreements if you want to. Like, it's very much made for people who have fallen in love with Thailand and want to be able to stay there longer, but aren't necessarily looking for citizenship or are looking for ways to, who knows? I don't know what the profile is, but for me, I feel like they have got their days of, they understand who they are targeting and they've got it. Same with Barbados. I had the honor of partnering with Barbados Tourism this year, and I would say that their remote work visa, the welcome stamp visa, makes total sense for somebody who has been to Barbados, someone who has had Barbados on their bucket list. And so you can essentially apply for this welcome stamp visa, which is 1 year, and it allows you to be there and like reside. And the government then works with you to then become part of the community. You become very much part of the community if you choose to as well. The way that they do it is so, it works so well with how the island is and how people in Barbados are culturally and how they operate within community as well, from my perspective anyway. These are just a couple of examples that I think have got it right. And I would not say that some of the other countries, we're at to like 70 visas now. I wouldn't necessarily that all 70 have got it correct yet, maybe, but I think that's also part of it culturally. Do these remote work visas actually make sense for these destinations? And I think coming up to 5 years of experiments and having had the time to see if these things work, I think it's time to look at, okay, what is it that these visas are doing? How does remote work fit into the culture? And many things beyond. Again, I feel like I could probably put something together that could be of interest for people. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, please feel free to DM me and let's have a conversation about this. Continuing on the marketing line, I feel like we need to talk about nomad influencers. And as somebody who has worked in influencer marketing as well as content creation, I can tell you, I feel like nomad influencers still don't fully address what it means to work and travel full-time or be somewhere full-time and connect meaningfully with a destination. There are a handful of creators who I think have got it right, but I think that, for example, if you were to search digital nomad, insert destination here, you wouldn't necessarily find too much further than budgeting, where to stay, and possibly like there might be a co-work or two in there, or like a day in the life of a digital nomad, right? I dare you, like, tell me I'm wrong. And there's nothing wrong with that content. Like, obviously it's needed. People want to know that stuff. That's why people are creating it. But when it comes to, for example, say people who I would then trust to tell me about a destination or to tell me what it means to work remotely, I don't know. I feel like I then switch off because I'm lacking that secondary search of what it actually means to be somewhere. And I think that's also it, is that a lot of people who consider themselves digital nomad influencers are representing destinations and this type of travel in a very short-term tourist kind of way still. And I'm sure there might be digital nomads listening to this going, like, who might be outraged by what I'm saying right now, but it's true. It's true. Like, please go look for that content. And I think what is seriously missing is content that actually showcases what it means to be somewhere. And I don't mean like going to a bar. I mean like what it means to go shop somewhere, what it means to go to a co-work space that has not been visited by like 50 other nomads. And what it means to, you know, be friends with the barista or have a conversation with somebody who runs a local business who you visit often. Like, tell me what it means to really be there, because those are the moments that I want to know about. And I think that it gets missed. And that's why I feel like there is an opportunity that is missed when digital nomads are the ones who get the seat at the table to talk about these visas, to talk about these programs. And it's because they aren't there long enough. And like, no disrespect, there's absolutely a space for this type of traveler, for this type of remote worker. However, I don't think is representative of a lot of people who remote work. I don't think it's representative of the majority of people who run businesses and or work remotely and travel at the same time. So that's where we'll leave it at that on the marketing and the influencing side. But actually one last point, which I think I've already touched on a little bit, but for me personally, I was finding that keeping up with posting, and that was just basic posting on Instagram, by the way. It wasn't even necessarily anything extra on YouTube. Like, yes, I had the podcast, but I had a lot of help for a couple of years with the editing. And I feel like even just basic posts, just keeping up with that part of things while also trying to manage travel, which I feel like we don't talk about enough. It was a lot and it wasn't sustainable. And I think that's also why I think that people will be quitting the digital nomad lifestyle or the digital nomad lifestyle is only going to be a chapter for people because it's a lot to manage your day job and or your business and then move around. Like, remember to book flights, remember to get on the flights, remember to have accommodation, to be packing up, to be unpacking, to be doing all these different things on top of your normal day. And I couldn't even imagine how people manage that constant moving around with kids, even. Like, hats off to you. And I think that just from a general like content creation perspective alone, I found that I was posting content that felt more like I was sort of trying to fit with this way that I should be doing things rather than creating content that was necessarily authentic to me. Like, yes, what I was posting was what was happening and what I was seeing and whatnot, but it was perhaps not at the depth that I wanted it to be or the authenticity that I wanted to be being, if that makes sense. And again, it's because being a digital nomad and traveling like a digital nomad, it doesn't represent my values. It's not accurate to who I am as a person. And it was just tiring. I was like, oh, I've not posted on Instagram today. Well, I should post. And then I was kind of numb to what I was posting. And I feel like it was possibly showing back in what I was posting, mirroring in what I was posting, which is not to say that that's how a lot of people feel, but I feel like there is a slight pressure to, especially not social media in general, right? There's a sort of pressure to almost feel like you are living your best life. And I was living my best life, like, don't get me wrong, but it was not in alignment with who I am and my values. Like I said, like several times already, I like to connect meaningfully and deeply with places I go, whether that is through books, through language, through food, through history, whatever it is. I like to go places and fully connect. And when I feel like I'm not doing that, either because I'm exhausted or sick, like I was getting sick so often at the end of last year, it's very hard. It's very hard to then feel good about what you're doing. It's not easy to then go about life day to day and feel like you're really meaningfully happy, I guess, which feels crazy to say, but that is what was happening. I, for myself, had to essentially just put the brakes on this digital nomad lifestyle that I was living because I was burning out. I was getting very sick, and it was because I was living a life that wasn't in alignment with who I am. And I know this won't be the same for other people, and that's where I feel like the conversations and nuances of slow madism comes in and whatnot. But considering the mainstream media articles that we've seen over the last few years about how people are returning to the office or feeling like they are, for example, setting up shop in other places and feel like they are not contributing meaningfully or well, or they're not connecting with how they would like to really be showing up in those communities, I think there are more people out there than we realize. I wouldn't say some of these articles I've been reading are, I'm sorry, the best journalism like I've ever seen, but they have a point. There is a common thread where I think people burn out because it's not necessarily sustainable. There are not the tools to make the life sustainable are not talked about enough. I don't feel like it's talked about enough necessarily as well. Maybe because we don't know how to or haven't figured that bit out yet. But ultimately, I think that more people are coming back to the office because they're just burning out. They haven't got the tools to make it sustainable. And it's not only the day-to-day, but also, and with travel, with keeping up that lifestyle, there is a massive identity shift that happens. And I've talked about this in a solo cast before, but I feel like we don't talk about the shifts in identity that happen when you are exposed to new cultures, to new communities, to new conversations, and then having to sort of then be with going back to friends who you've known for years, with family members, with like sort of even yourself. Like for me, knew that I had a massive identity loss a few years ago, and I hadn't dealt with it. I was trying to move on and put a plaster over, or a band-aid over, a big gaping wound, and I hadn't talked about it because there was not this conversation that had been had around it, and I couldn't tell you how I figured that out myself. I just remember all of a sudden I was like, damn, I had a massive identity loss and I never dealt with it. I think because we were having this big thing called the pandemic, and again, I've said this before, but can we talk about the fact that the pandemic was basically a big traumatic experience for literally all of us? But yeah, so there was a lot of sort of inner work that I felt like I just had to start doing. And in January, I took this massive pause off Instagram. I just had zero will to post whatsoever. And I just began being with myself and dealing with all the things that for a few years I had just sort of been covering up and pretending I was okay without realizing. And just sort of, because I was okay, I was living this really cool lifestyle that looked so cool online and all the rest of it. But ultimately, I wasn't. And I feel like, as with any kind of travel, there is likely people who also thought and saw that the digital nomad lifestyle is the best thing ever, and thought that they could run away from their problems by becoming a digital nomad and, going off and seeing the world. Let me tell you, that is not a thing. Like, I feel like digital nomadism, or remote working, again, at least, allow me to become more of myself, for sure. It allowed me to rediscover myself. I feel like I've, over the last year, really sort of come back to myself, ultimately. That's what it is, come back to myself and what matters to me, right? And it's allowed me the space and flexibility to do that, ultimately, so that I can then go, okay, digital nomadism, possibly not for me anymore. However, I still love remote work and the power that remote work has. I just need to look at it from a much more mindful and meaningful lens that I was perhaps doing before. Again, we all do this lifestyle differently. We all pick life and the way we want to do life differently, but how we know digital nomadism is not authentic to me. It's not in alignment with who I am as a person. I knew I had to just take a massive magnifying glass to where I was at with things, looking at, okay, there was a loss that I had to deal with. There was a completely out of the blue pandemic. There was then just trying to pick up the pieces and figure out where I wanted to go next with my life and my new trajectory, because what it was before the pandemic, it was very different. Okay, how can I make a life of my dreams that works for me and maybe doesn't look like other people, and be okay with the fact that that's kind of scary too? I think that we don't talk enough about being alone, for example, and the power of being alone and being with ourselves, and actually being with what works for us, and being okay with what looks for us might not look like the majority of us, like the majority of people who are around us at the time as well. And that's scary. We're social beings. We want connection, and I think we want to be heard. I think that it can be so easy to try and cover up and pretend that we're okay, when actually I think then people just burn out and go, right, I'm going home. That must be the solution. Like, I'm going back to a 9 to 5. That's safety. That is the only way I had a healthy routine. And I think that there are so many conversations that still don't get talked about enough in the remote work and digital nomad space. Well, that's a lot longer than I would normally do for a solo cast. And I think I might leave it here. But if you're curious about talking about healing and grief and processing grief, let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. But ultimately, I think that from 2026, in order to create a sustainable remote work industry, there needs to be more conversation around who that encompasses and who we're targeting and who that's marketed for. And that's across so many different areas of the space. And like I said, if you want help, if you want to have a chat, DM me. You know where I'm at. But thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Remote Life, and I hope to remote work with you again soon.